Leviticus says, "If a man also lie with mankind, as he lieth with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood shall be upon them." So, the way I read that, if you've never had sex with a woman, or if you have, but you don't have sex with a man who also has a vagina, you're in the clear. Oh, and I just want to point out that lesbians are A-OK based on that verse.
On the single condition that you identify the body or the living person of the slave called Spartacus.
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus!
Spartacus!
This is the Atheist in the Trailer Park Podcast. I'm your host, Tucker. Professor Fuzznuts is off somewhere, no doubt plotting my untimely demise. If you suddenly hear me scream, it's because he decided to leap out from the shadows and attach himself to the back of my neck like he usually does. Yes, it's a podcast hosted by a guy and his cat. Get over it. If you happen to like the podcast, you can follow it on Twitter. TParkAtheist is the show's Twitter handle, and it's also on Facebook at facebook.com/trailerparkatheist. You can email me at trailerparkatheist@gmail.com. Don't forget to rate the show on iTunes. This is a Bible Myths episode where I read a chapter or two from T.W. Doan's Bible Myths and Their Parallels in Other Religions. Next episode will be a news episode. Bible Myths and Their Parallels in Other Religions is a work written in the late 1800s which attempts to show that many of the stories in the Bible did not originate with the Bible and, in fact, predate it by a number of centuries. So far as I know, biblical scholarship has generally confirmed that Doan was right about what he wrote, and much of what he says raises rather pointed questions about the Bible and the religions it has influenced over the centuries. You don't need to listen to previous episodes to understand what's going but you can download previous episodes at trailerparkatheist.libsyn.com. You can find a free digital version of the book at books.google.com or at archive.org or at gutenberg.org. Now on to the book. Chapter 7, Receiving the Ten Commandments. The receiving of the Ten Commandments by Moses from the Lord is recorded in the following manner. In the 3rd month, when the children of Israel were gone forth out of the land of Egypt, the same day came they into the wilderness of Sinai, and there Israel camped before the mount. And it came to pass, and allow me to interject, if you're a listener of my Book of Mormon, you know that's a cue to take a drink. On the 3rd day, that there were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud upon the mount, and the voice of the tempest exceedingly loud, so that all of the people that was in the camp trembled. And Mount Sinai was altogether on a smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire, and the smoke thereof ascended as the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mount quaked greatly. And when the voice of the tempest sounded long and waxed louder and louder, Moses spake, and God answered him by a voice. And the Lord came down upon the mount, and called Moses up to the top of the mount, and Moses went up. The Lord there communed with him, and he gave unto Moses 2 tablets of testimony, tables of stone, written with the finger of God. When Moses came down from off the mount, he found the children of Israel dancing around a golden calf, which his brother Aaron had made. And as his anger waxed hot, he cast the tables of stone on the ground and broke them. Moses again saw the Lord on the mount, however, and received 2 more tables of stone when he came down from off Mount Sinai. When he came down this time from off Mount Sinai, the skin of his face did shine. There's a footnote. It was a common belief among ancient pagan nations that the gods appeared and conversed with men. As an illustration, we may cite the following, related by Herodotus, the Grecian historian who, in speaking of Egypt and the Egyptians, says, "There is a large city called Shemus, situated in the Thebaic district near Neapolis, in which is a quadrangular temple dedicated to the god Perseus, son of the Virgin Danae, I think that's how it's pronounced. Palm trees grow round it, and the portico is of stone, very spacious, and over it are placed 2 large stone statues. In this enclosure is a temple, and in it is placed a statue of Perseus. The Shemate, or the inhabitants of Shemus, affirm that Perseus has frequently appeared to them on earth and frequently within the temple." Herodotus, Book 2, Chapter 91. Well, it doesn't really mention anything about fire or anything else. Rather strange footnote. Back to the main text. These 2 tables of stone contain the 10 Commandments, so it is said, which the Jews and Christians of the present day are supposed to take for their standard. They are, in substance, as follows. 1. To have no other God but Jehovah. 2. To make no image for the purpose of worship. 3. Not to take Jehovah's name in vain. 4. Not to work on the Sabbath day. 5. To honor their parents. 6. Not to kill. 7. Not to commit adultery. 8. Not to steal. 9. Not to bear false witness against a neighbor. 10. Not to covet. Okay, we got a footnote here. Buddha, the founder of Buddhism, had 10 commandments. 1. Not to kill. 2. Not to steal. 3. To be chaste. 4. Not to bear false witness. 5. Not to lie. 6. Not to swear. 7. To avoid impure words, which I'm not sure how that differentiates between lying and swearing, but whatever. 8. To be disinterested. 9. Not to avenge oneself. 10. Not to be superstitious. See Hughes Travels, page 328, volume 1. Dr. Oort says the original 10 Commandments probably ran as follows. I, Yahweh, am your God. Worship no other gods beside me. Make no image of a god. Commit no perjury. Remember to keep holy the Sabbath day. Honor your father and your mother. Commit no murder. Break not the marriage vow. Steal not. Bear no false witness. Covet not. Bible for Learners. Volume 1, page 18. Okay, now let me interject something here. I just happened to be listening to a podcast today called Futility Closet, and they were talking about, on part of the program today, I think it was this one. If it's not, I know it was another one. There we are. I got to find the right section of the site. Okay. They were talking about a naturalist. Yes. They have a segment, and I'll link to this in the show notes, on a naturalist by the name of Ernest Thompson Seton, who in 1907, I guess it was 1907, kind of confusing the way they gave you the date. Anyways, in 1907, he wrote an article, The Natural History of the Ten Commandments, in which he claimed that animals obeyed the Ten Commandments. Sort of. If you listen to the piece, you find out that, well, no, he didn't claim they obeyed all the Ten Commandments. Like the first 4, they ignored. But he said they had, that thou shalt not kill, they obeyed. And his example was, bizarrely enough, that a newborn rattlesnake would strike at anything it saw unless it saw another member of its own species, and then it wouldn't strike that. So he says that's proof, and it's actually kind of nutty. No shit, there's a mild understatement. But it's all subjective and it's all crap, and it got Teddy Roosevelt pissed off, who said, you're full of shit. And it's funny because, Bible Myths was written, like I said, in the 1880s, and this is 20 odd years after Bible Myths was first published, that we have people saying, oh, animals, they follow the Ten Commandments. I mean, that just shows how weird our society was back then. Okay, back to the text. We have already seen in the last chapter that Bacchus was called the lawgiver, and that his laws were written on 2 tables of stone. Footnote. Bell's Pantheon, Volume 1, page 122. Higgins, Volume 2, page 19. Cox, Aryan Mythos, Volume 2, page 295. Okay, back to the text. This feature in the Hebrew legend was evidently copied from that related of Bacchus, but the idea of Moses, receiving the commandments from the Lord on a mountain was obviously taken from the Persian legend related of Zoroaster. Professor Max Mueller says, what applies to the religion of Moses applies to that of Zoroaster. It is placed before us as a complete system from the first revealed by Ahura Mazda, proclaimed by Zoroaster. Footnote 4, Mueller, Origin of Religion, page 130. The disciples of Zoroaster, in their profusion of legends of the Master, relate that one day, as he prayed on a high mountain in the midst of thunders and lightnings, fire from heaven, the Lord himself before him, and delivered unto him the book of law. While the king of Persia and the people were assembled together, Zoroaster came down from the mountain unharmed, bringing with him the book of law, which had been revealed to him by Ormuzd. They call this book the Zend Avesta, which signifies the living word. Footnote. See Progressive Religious Ideas, Volume 1, pages 257, 258. This book, the Zend Avesta, is similar in many respects to the Vedas of the Hindus. And I'm sure all of you have seen those Bibles that have the title Living Word on them. So I wonder if the person who came up with that knew of that, of the Zoroastrianism connection to that phrase. According to the religion of the Cretans, and this is back in the main text now, Minos, their lawgiver, ascended a mountain, Mount Dicta, and there received from the Supreme Lord, Zeus, the sacred laws which he brought down with him. footnote. Oh, my mistake. The footnote from the previous page was continued onto this page, so let me finish that, and then we'll go on to the correct one. This has led many to believe that Zoroaster was a Brahmin. Among those are Rawlinson, see Inman's Ancient Faiths, Volume 2, page 831, and Thomas Morris, see Indian Antiquities, Volume 2, page 219. The Persians themselves had a tradition that he came from some country to the east of them. That he was a foreigner is indicated by a passage in the Zend Avesta, which represents Ormuzd as saying to him, "Thou, O Zoroaster, by the promulgation of my law, shalt restore to me my former glory, which was pure light. Up! Haste thee to the land of Iran, which thirstest after the law, and say, Thus said Ormuzd," and so on. See Progressive Religious Ideas, Volume 1, page 263. And the footnote that I actually came down to here to read before I discovered that the footnote from the previous page continued over is The Bible for Learners, Volume 1, page 301. Okay, back to the main text. And I will interject here that there is some theory that Christianity, whether it was Jesus who preached this or somebody else, was a misremembering of Buddhist philosophy. I don't know. I have no idea what the evidence for that is. I've heard experts mention that as a possibility, but they didn't seem, they said it's a possibility. They didn't, in the sense that, it's not impossible, but there's no weight given to how likely it might have been. So who knows? Almost all nations of antiquity have legends of their holy men ascending a mountain to ask counsel of the gods, such places being invested with peculiar sanctity and deemed nearer to the deities than other portions of the earth. Footnote: the deities of the Hindu pantheon dwell on the sacred Mount Meru. The gods of Persia ruled from Alborj, Albordj. The Greek Jove thundered from Olympus, and the Scandinavian gods made Asgard awful with their presence. Profane history is full of examples attesting the attachment to high places for the purpose of sacrifice. Squire Serpent Symbols, page 78. The offerings of the Chinese to the deities were generally on the summits of high mountains, as they seemed to them to be nearer heaven, to the majesty of which they were to be offered. Christmas Mythos, page 250 in Serpent Symbols, huh? I don't know. A little weird citation. In the infancy of civilization, high places were chosen by the people to offer sacrifices to the gods. The first altars, the first temples, were erected on mountains. Humboldt, American Researchers. The Himalayas are the heavenly mountains. In Sanskrit, Himala, H-I-M, I guess it's an E, it's a bad scan, L-A, corresponding to the M Gothic Himins, H-I-M-I-N-S, Alim, Himmel, German, Swedish, Danish, Himmel, Old Norse, Himmen, Dutch, Himmel, Anglo-Saxon, Heofan, English, Anglo-Saxon, Heofan, English, Heaven. See Mallett's Northern Antiquities, page 42. I get what he's trying to do here, although it's not initially very clear. he's showing similar phrases. I don't know what it's called, but where a word in one language is similar to a word in a different language, and they both have a related meaning. An example is that the word some variation of ma or mama or mother is found in every human language, and they all mean the same thing, mother. Okay, back to the main text. According to Egyptian belief, it is Thoth, the deity itself, that speaks and reveals to his elect among men the will of God and the arcana of divine things. Portions of them are expressly stated to have been written by the very finger of Thoth himself, to have been the work and the composition of the great God. Footnote 3. Bunsen's Egypt, quoted in Isis Unveiled, Volume 2, page 367. Mrs. Child says, the laws of Egypt were handed down from the earliest times and regarded with the utmost veneration as a portion of religion. Their first legislator represented them as dictated by the gods themselves, and framed expressly for the benefit of mankind by their secretary Thoth. Progressive Religious Ideas, Volume 1, page 178. Diodorus, the Grecian historian, says the idea promulgated by the ancient Egyptians that their laws were received direct from the Most High God has been adopted with success by many other lawgivers, who have thus ensured respect for their institutions. The supreme gods of the ancient Mexicans was, and I am going to butcher the shit out of this motherfucker, Tezcatlipoca, Tezcatlipoca. He occupied a position corresponding to the Jehovah of the Jews, the Brahma of India, the Zeus of the Greeks, and the Odin of the Scandinavians. His name is compounded of Tezcatepec, Tezcatepec, the name of a mountain upon which he is said to have manifested himself to man, Tlil, Tlil, dark, and Polka, smoke. The explanation of this designation is given in the Code Vaticanus as follows. Tezcatlipoca was one of their most potent deities. They say he once appeared on the top of a mountain. They paid him great reverence and adoration and addressed him in their prayers as Lord, whose servant we are. No man ever saw his face, for he appeared only as a shade. Indeed, the Mexican idea of the Godhead was similar to that of the Jews. Like Jehovah, Tezcatlipoca dwelt in the midst of thick darkness. When he descended upon the mount of Tezcatepec, darkness overshadowed the earth, while fire and water in mingled streams flowed from beneath his feet from its summit. Footnote. See Squire's Serpent Symbol, page 175. I wonder if his name isn't, if he's not the one who's often translated as Smoking Mirror, since, let's face it, whiteys like me can't pronounce that name. Okay, back to the main text. Thus we see that other nations beside the Hebrews believed that their laws were actually received from God, that they had legends to that effect, and that a mountain figures conspicuously in the stories. And Fuzznuts, you stay out of my water, buddy. You got a bowl of your own. I need mine. Professor Oort, speaking on this subject, says, No one who has any knowledge of antiquity will be surprised at this, for similar beliefs were quite common. Similar beliefs were very common. All peoples who had issued from a life of barbarism and acquired regular political institutions, more or less elaborate laws, and established worship and maxims of morality, attributed all this, their birth as a nation, so to speak, to one or more great men, all of whom, without exception, were supposed to have received their knowledge from some deity. Whence did Zoroaster, the prophet of the Persians, derive his religion? According to the beliefs of his followers and the doctrines of their sacred writings, it was from Ahura Mazda, the god of light. Let me interject here. Sounds like Satan. Why did the Egyptians represent the god Thoth with a writing tablet and a pencil in his hand, and honor him especially as the god of the priests? Because he was the Lord of the divine word, the foundation of all wisdom, from whose inspiration the priests, who were the scholars, the lawyers, and the religious teachers of the people, derived all their wisdom. Was not Minos, the lawgiver of the Cretans, the friend of Zeus, the highest of the gods? Nay, was he not even his son? And did he not ascend to the sacred cave on Mount Dicta to bring down the laws which his God had placed there for him? From whom did the Spartan lawgiver Lycurgus himself say that he had obtained his laws? From no other than the god Apollo. The Roman legend, too, in honoring Numa Pompilius as the people's instructor, at the same time ascribed all his wisdom to his intercourse with the nymph Egeria. Bow chicka wow wow. It was the same elsewhere. And to make one more example, this, from later times, Muhammad not only believed himself to have been called immediately by God to be the prophet of the Arabs, but declared that he had received every page of the Koran from the hand of the angel Gabriel. Footnote, The Bible for Learners, Volume 1, page 301. And that's it for that chapter. We're about halfway through the hour, and once I edit out a few things, I'm sure it'll shrink, so I'll go ahead to chapter 8, which is Samson and his exploits. On second thought, scratch that. I tried recording it, and chapter 8 alone is about an hour and a half. So, since I like to keep these episodes down to about an hour, that way, with my current hosting plan, I can put up about one a week. I'm going to keep this episode down to just chapter 7 and some other things like programming notes. I want to make you aware that sometime, I'm not sure exactly when, I may have to change a bit of the format, and the posting schedule may shift from the weekend to some other time. I'm getting a roommate. One of the guys I work with has ran into hard times and needs a place to stay. I have plenty of space, so he'll be moving in here with me. He wouldn't really object, I don't think, to the subject matter of the podcast. He's expressed opinions which indicate that he's a nun, a person who, has no religious affiliation, and based on the things that he said to me, I'm reasonably certain he's actually agnostic or atheistic, but cannot bring himself to go so far as to say that. He's, made statements like, well, every time I get questions, or I read on religion, I have more questions than I have answers. I go to, they told me go to church and you'll understand everything, and that just made everything worse. So, he does, however, have a 13-year-old son. So, teenagers not exactly known for being quiet. So, and I don't have anywhere that I can set up my computer and stuff to record that would be isolated and soundproofable. So I will have to cut the episodes when I know they're not going to be around, just so I don't have to worry about noise levels. That may mean I can't post news episodes because sometimes it takes me a long time to find material. But if nothing else, I mean, I can sit. I have an Android tablet, and I've got my iPhone. I can sit outside or sit somewhere where I know I'm not going to be disturbed and read from Bible Myths and record it that way. But I wouldn't be able to do news stories just because the tablet is barely able to run the Google Books app, and trying to do anything fancy with news stories, multiple tabs open at one time, just causes it to shit itself and die. So, to sum up and make something coherent out of that rambling, in the near future, may not be posting quite as regularly, but I will try to do so. May not always be doing a news episode on the schedule I had planned of alternating weeks. May be more episodes that deal with me reading from Bible myths and their parallels in other religions. Have you got that? Did I finally make enough sense and stop rambling? I hope so. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is just pad this episode out to about an hour's length with just a grab bag of news that I found on the inner tubes that are related or just kind of interesting. The first story comes from the Daily Mail, or as it's often called, the Daily Fail. The headline is, New book claims this picture proves Hitler escaped his Berlin bunker and died in South America in 1984, aged 95. Okay. He is believed to have died after shooting himself in a Berlin bunker in 1945 when he realized Germany had lost World War II. But a startling new book claims Adolf Hitler actually escaped his hideout and died incognito in 1984 in a small town near Brazil's border with Bolivia, and it can be proved by a picture. Not only that, but the author believes the Fuhrer fled to Argentina and then Paraguay before settling in the Brazilian state of Mato Grosso to hunt for buried treasure, with a map given to him by Vatican allies, according to its author. And they have the photo. I can't make out shit. Really. It's a blurry, crappy photo of what appears to be an old man with his arm around a woman of, I'm guessing, mixed race ethnicity. I can't really tell. They have a photo of some kind of clothing, but it's blurry, it's crappy, and so and the article's claiming that the black woman in the photo was named Cutinga. Cutinga. Maybe that's a real name in Portuguese or Spanish, but I'm not thinking so. There's nothing in the article indicating that they know where the body is buried or anything like that. So, there's not even any opportunity to dig it up and do a DNA test or anything. Or for forensic reconstruction of the skull. Yeah. So that's bullshit, but it's kind of funny and entertaining, I think. Okay, this next piece comes from the Raw story. Christian broadcaster, Ebola could cleanse U.S. of atheists, gay people, and sluts. A Christian radio host who enthusiastically looks for signs the world will end welcomed the Ebola virus as a cleansing force. This Ebola epidemic could become a global pandemic, and that's another name for plague, said broadcaster Rick Wiles on his True News program. The assumption, of course, being that, only people who fall into these categories will be killed by the Ebola, when in actuality it's not the case that this would happen in that manner. While we do know the mechanisms by which Ebola is transmitted, there have been a number of instances where people who've been exposed to the virus and should have contracted it didn't, and nobody's sure if those people are just naturally immune or if there's something else going on. There's been other cases where nobody's really sure how the person became infected. Obviously, they must have had contact with somebody's bodily fluids, but how they came in contact with them is unknown. Finally, there are people who have, when they've become infected with HIV, have become serial killers. There was a dentist in the late 80s, early 90s who was HIV positive and infected not all, of course, but infected a number of his patients with HIV. I don't know off the top of my head if any of them survived, but this was at a time before we had any kind of real treatment for HIV. So, people knowing that Ebola has a fairly high fatality rate and realizing that they've become infected with the disease, some of them, what percentage we don't know, are going to probably try to spread and infect as many people as they possibly can. Rather disturbing picture. And you've got this asshole who thinks, there's nothing wrong with me wishing people I don't like death from a horrible disease. Yeah, I know there are times when I agree with the sentiment that certain people just ought to be killed, but I'd rather they have a quick and painless death than something as horrific as Ebola or even cancer. If you haven't read The Hot Zone, which is about an outbreak of a variant of Ebola in monkeys in Reston, Virginia, it's a good read. It inspired the movie Outbreak, which I've not seen, so I don't know how that is. But the book, The Hot Zone, is really frightening. Just horrifically frightening, without being sensationalized of and making claims that, Ebola's going to kill us all. It doesn't do that. It's pretty cold and calculating and scientific in a lot of spots. Like it opens with an account of a researcher who's in one of the deep bunker-like sections of the disease research stations where they handle the really lethal and nasty stuff. And she gets a hole in her glove and races to go through to get out of there and get into the decontamination area and get herself cleaned off before, so that hopefully it prevents her from being infected. And listening to the description of her dealing with all that, stripping the clothing off, going through the showers, everything, and just freaking out will have you shitting bricks, because it's not even, and it's not even Ebola, but it's just so vividly described, and you realize the seriousness of the kind of stuff that she and the other researchers are having to deal with. So it's a great read. Like I said, and if you haven't picked it up, I'd seriously consider it. Okay, back to the asshole. It may be the great attitude adjustment that I believe is coming, Wiles continued. Ebola could solve America's problems with atheism, homosexuality, sexual promiscuity, pornography, and abortion. And again, why does God need to kill people he doesn't like in such a horrific manner? Why not just vanish them? You know? Or just have them all fall over dead from a massive stroke. You know, it's quick, it's painless, no need for a lot of suffering, no chances of some innocent person being infected by the disease. Just a dickhead. And the next story comes from the Daily Beast. Islamic extremists now crucifying people in Syria and tweeting out pictures. The jihadist group, so radical it got kicked out of Al-Qaeda, has apparently hit a new and shocking low. It is allegedly crucifying its enemies. Public crucifixions are mostly ceremonial these days, staged rituals that some Christian communities enact as part of their Easter observance. I want to interject. There are, I guess, in Mexico and other Latin American countries where really devout people will actually have themselves crucified to, show their devotion or gain an understanding of what Jesus must have endured. Yeah, okay. If that's what you want. But not me. But the real thing may be returning to Syria. 2 men were reportedly crucified in Raqqa on Tuesday, their bloody corpses displayed in the center of a town controlled by the most severe of Syria's Islamist factions. Among the forms of slaughter that have become commonplace in Syria's civil war, crucifixion may be no more brutal than barrel bombs or sarin gas attacks. But the revival of an ancient form of torture is one sign of what life is like under the rule of Syria's powerful Islamist factions. And it's an indication that, despite years of public hand-wringing in the West over Syria's bloody and rapid decline, the country is continuing to plummet into new depths of the abyss. Now, they have a photo here. And honestly, it doesn't really look like an actual crucifixion. It's a low-res photo. And when I say it doesn't look like an actual crucifixion, it appears the guy has just been tied to a bloody board and been blindfolded. The resolution is too low to see if there's any nails through his forearms at all. It doesn't look like it. There could be, and you can't see his feet, so you can't see if those are nailed. So he may have just been tortured, and then, for all I can tell from this photo, he could have been beaten and then shot, and then his body strapped to the improvised cross, and that erected. There's no way to tell. I mean, it looks... I can't tell any more than what I've just said. I thought there was something there that indicated something about the kind of pole he's tied to, but no, that's just an effect of the crappy photograph. So, is it real? I don't know. Okay, and this next story comes from the Washington Post. Scientists may have cracked the giant Siberian crater mystery, and the news isn't good. They're up to 3 now, I think? Researchers have long contended that the epicenter of global warming is also farthest from the reach of humanity. It's in the barren landscapes of the frozen north, where red-cheeked children wear fur, the sun barely rises in the winter, and temperatures can plunge dozens of degrees below zero. Such a place is the Yamal Peninsula in Siberia, translated as the ends of the earth, a desolate spit of land where a group called the Nenets live. By now you've heard of the crater on the Yamal Peninsula. It's the one that suddenly appeared, yawning nearly 100 feet in diameter, and made several rounds in the global viral media machine. The adjectives most often used to describe it: giant, mysterious, curious. Scientists were subsequently baffled. Locals were mystified. There were whispers that aliens were responsible. Nearby residents peddled theories of bright flashes and celestial bodies. Skipping down a bit, it may be methane gas released by the thawing of frozen ground. According to a recent Nature article, air near the bottom of the crater contained unusually high concentrations of methane, up to 9.6%, in tests conducted at the site on 16 July, says Andrei Plekhanov, an archaeologist at the Scientific Center of Arctic Studies in Samarkand, Russia. Plekhanov, who led an expedition to the crater, says that air normally contains just 0.000179% methane. The scientist said the methane release may be related to Yamal's unusually hot summers in 2012 and 2013, which were warmer by an average of 5 degrees Celsius. As temperatures rose, the researchers suggest permafrost thawed and collapsed, releasing methane that had been trapped in the icy ground, the report stated. That's just a preliminary report, of course. But yeah, that's pretty awful. Not something that we really needed, but of course, people are going to deny it. Which reminds me, I need to check here quickly. You'll forgive me for babbling like an idiot, but I'm covering up the fact that I'm actually going and searching something, because I saw yesterday I have a Roku box, and they have different channels. It's sort of like a set-top box that your cable company provides, only it pulls its stuff from the internet. And they have a channel that is dedicated to old movie serials. They don't have a huge selection of programming on that channel, but they have the 1948 live-action movie serial of Superman. And they're showing, and I watched the first episode of it last night, and they're showing the sequence where Jor-El is in front of the council talking about, well, we've got to do something because Krypton's about to go into the sun. And right outside, in an earlier scene, you see a shot right outside Jor-El's laboratory window, and there's this volcano erupting. There's discussions of earthquakes and everything, and they're in the council chamber, and Jor-El saying, look, we're going into the fucking sun. We got to do something or we're going to fucking die. And there's people on the council, well, we're not really sure about this. I mean, you're a great scientist. You've never steered us wrong before, but we're just not seeing this as being a big issue. And it's like, oh my fucking God, it sounds just like the assholes bitching about global warming. It's crazy. Well, there's a 5-minute version, and I think the one on YouTube, and I think the one I watched was like half an hour. So I'll have to watch this and see if it actually shows up. If it actually is the one that I'm thinking of. If it is, I'll post a link to it because it's pretty awesome. And like I said, you look at it, you're going, oh my God, it's the global warming debate all over again. And this predates the debate over global warming, at least in the public sector, by several decades. Okay. Now, where are we at for time? Okay. So this will be the final news story. This comes from the Raw Story. Ted Nugent mocks unclean dipshit Native Americans. Whites stole their land is bullshit, says the headline. Controversial rocker, that's an understatement. Ted Nugent on Thursday lashed out at Native Americans who protested one of his South Dakota concerts, calling them stinky-ass, unclean, dipshit protesters. Earlier this summer, Nugent had been scheduled to appear at a casino in Worley, Idaho, but the tribe canceled after learning about his history of racially inflammatory comments. So, right there, that proves they are infinitely smarter than Nugent. Okay, let's just get to the juicy stuff here. On Thursday, Nugent took to his Facebook page to complain about Native American protesters from the United Urban Warrior Society in Rapid City who showed up at his Wednesday event in Sturgis. We are on our jet now, heading for Toledo Ribfest Jam after an insane, incredible, out-of-body ultra rock out at the Full Throttle Saloon in Sturgis, South Dakota, Nugent wrote, according to Media Matters. Simply astonishing gig. 4 stinky-ass, unclean dipshit protesters that admitted they hate me and all white people that stole their land bullshit. See, it ain't me they hate. They hate all Americans that produce and live the American dream. Simply insane. Yeah. You know, it's a shame I don't listen to Ted Nugent's music, because then I could burn all my albums of his in protest. But I've never really listened to him, so I can't do that. I certainly won't go... won't support anybody that has anything to do with him if I can at all help it. Okay, so like I said, that's going to do it. That'll be the last story. I apologize. I really can't gauge how long a chapter is going to take me unless I read it out loud, just because of various things. And like I said, half the time I cut an episode 5 times before I get to one that I think is at least tolerable. And, you know, I'm amazed anybody listens to it at all, because I really can't stand the sound of my own voice. But I would like to thank all of you for putting up with me. And next week's episode will be a news episode with different news stories than the ones I just read. I try to be current on the news stories, and I don't... Like, there are some podcasts that are monthly, and they'll gather up a bunch of news stories and read them off on the air. And often they get... You know, I've already heard the stories that they're covering, so it's not really news to me, though they do occasionally have news stories I haven't heard of, or they have a perspective I haven't heard before on the stories. So I keep them around, but that's not the way I like to do podcasts. So anyways, that'll be it for this episode. I want to thank everybody for listening. I am just hugely amazed at the way the numbers have spiked up, and I realize that 90-odd% of you, thereabouts, discovered this thanks to the fine folks over at the Scathing Atheist podcast. But for those handful of you who haven't started listening to it, the next episode that I do from Bible Myths and Their Parallels in Other Religions, if you can remember back that far when I mentioned the chapter title, deals extensively with Samson, covers the fact that he's most likely a sun god from some society that we don't really know much about, who his story was incorporated into Jewish mythology, making and they converting him into a quote-unquote hero. I mention this because on the past... The most recent episode of The Scathing Atheist, Lucinda Lugens did a segment on Samson and does a good recounting of the story as it's given in the Bible, with plenty of humor injected in. So those 10 of you people, or however many it are, who don't subscribe to that podcast, might want to get it and listen to it, because the two things complement one another fairly well. Not that I have anywhere near the talent as Lucinda or Noah does, or even Heath, but at least those segments kind of work together, hand in hand. All right, I'll cease my babbling now. That's it for this episode of the Atheist in the Trailer Park Podcast. You can follow the show on Twitter. TParkAtheist is the show's Twitter handle, and it's also on Facebook at facebook.com/trailerparkatheist. You can email me at trailerparkatheist@gmail.com. Show notes for this and most other episodes can be found at tparkatheist.blogspot.com. Don't forget to rate the show on iTunes. The next episode should be a news episode. Say goodnight, Fuzznuts. Damned cat.
All I know is this violates every canon of respectable broadcasting.